All right, it's Dr. Parker here for our last introductory screencast for a text. This is the Franklin's Tale, which I have been promising you for some time as kind of the antidote for some of the weird marriage stories that we've been reading. And it's not perfect, but it's certainly going to be a relief after some of the other stuff that you've seen. I want to harken back first to the Franklin in the general prologue because we didn't really talk about him, and there's not too much to his description in terms of his character, but what it does. So Franklin, by the way, is just a wealthy landowner, an estate holder, I guess, is a good way to put it. But the Franklin is described in the general prologue not in terms of his estate holdings, but in the fact that his house was always full of food, full of food and guests. It wasn't just him being a glutton, it was his hospitality. They talked about that in his house it always snowed food and meat. They talk about the fact that his board was always up. And if you look at this illustration that I've given you here, see how the table is supported by, it looks like a little tripod or sawhorse on either end. Normally in a medieval home, the food went on a board. It was a table that was made up of a board and two sawhorses or something like that. And you would put the two sawhorses down, put the board on top of them, and load it up with food. And then when the meal was done, you would put these things away to make room in the kitchen or the dining room or wherever it was that you were eating. And hence, this is where we get the expression room and board. If you rent a room in a house and you also get your meals, that's the board, as they spread out the board and put your food on it. In the Franklin's house, it never came down, this table. There was food out all day, every day, and all night, I suppose. So what does that tell us about him? It means that he liked to have a good time. It means that he was gracious and a good host, and I think generous. He's very concerned with this question of generosity, as he's going to put it in his tale also. So that's the Franklin. And as I say, we don't know much about him. We know he's got a white beard and red skin, so he's sort of sanguine, like the wife of Bath, like the miller. He is a jolly person who is maybe led by his appetites. And in his case, it seems to be an appetite for food. Sorry, I got a low-flying plane coming over here. I don't think I'll be hit, though. Okay, so let's go to his tale. So his tale is supposed to be a Breton lay, which means an old Celtic story from the north of France, from Brittany. Although we don't have it in any other version, so it seems as though maybe his is original, or at least unique. So we have a courtly love story. We have Dorigen, the woman, and Arviragus, who is the knight. And he woos her over a long and suitable period of time, and they get married, and they're very much in love, and it's very much a marriage in accordance with the courtly tradition, where he spends about a year wooing her and proving his worth. And they get married, and they're really, really happy. But I want to show you, I want to look at a couple of passages where they talk about the kind of marriage that it is. All right, so when they get married, it says of his free will. So notice that, by the way, this is that nobody asked him to do this, especially her. Of his free will, he swore to her as a knight that never in all of his life, day or night, he would take upon himself any mastery against her will, or act jealously towards her, but obey her and follow her will in all, as any lover to his lady shall, save in the name of sovereignty, and that would he have for the shame of his degree. So he swears, and of his own free will, he swears to her, I will never try to control you. I will not be jealous of you. I will not tell you what to do, but I will obey you and I will follow your will. And it says he will retain the name of sovereignty. He will, in name, be the head of the household for shame of his degree. Because he's a knight, the other knights would think less of him and make fun of him if he said that he obeyed his wife. So he'll keep the name of the head of the household, but he will never wield that power. He will never tell her what to do. She thanked him, and with very great humbleness, she said, Sir, because of your gentility, you offer me such a large rein. You've given me a long leash. Um, I never want, by God, I never want anything to come between us that was in my guilt, whether it was war or strife. In other words, I don't want to be the cause ever of anything that comes between us, by God. Sir, I will be your humble true wife. Have here my trotha, my truth, but troth, my promise, my honor. When people get engaged, they're betrothed. I plight thee my troth, the wedding ceremony used to say. So have here my honor. And this is sort of in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. He's always talking about troth. So have my promise until my heart bursts. Thus they are both in quiet and in rest. For one thing, sirs, I can safely say that friends each other must obey if they will keep company for a long time. Love will not be constrained by mastery. When mastery comes, the God of love anon beats his wings, and farewell, he is gone. All right, so look at this. So here we have a marriage that, first of all, line 762 is couched in the terms of friendship, which is in and of itself pretty unusual. This is not the age of the companionate marriage. This is back when people are marrying either for the rich people marrying for advantage and alliance, and poor people marrying to produce children to help them work the land. So here the Franklin, anyway, as narrator, has said that spouses should be friends. But notice that the way that this arrangement has come to, you can't force people to have an arrangement like this. He says of his own free will, honey, by the way, I'm never going to take mastery over you. I'm never going to tell you what to do. And she says, because you have been so kind to say that, I will never give you cause to feel the need to take mastery over me. So it's a mutual obedience. He will obey her, and she will obey him, and they will both strive to never do anything that will make the other one regret that decision. And here we see a little bit further down the continuation of this. And she began to wisely swear to him that there would never be a fault in her. Here may men see a humble, wise accord. Thus has she taken her servant and her lord, servant in love and lord in marriage. And Chaucer here is getting at this really interesting paradox, which is in the world of courtly love, when the man is wooing, he tells the woman, you know, I am your servant, I am your slave, I will fight dragons for you, I will languish in prison for you. But then the moment that the marriage is completed, he becomes the lord of the house. He becomes in control of her. So it's this weird flip-flop where you at least give lip service to the idea that you're the servant of the woman, but then you become her lord. So Chaucer's trying to reconcile these. So he says, then he was both in lordship and servitude. Servitude, no, but in lordship above, since he has both his lady and his love. His lady indeed, and his wife also. How can you have your lover and your wife simultaneously? And the way that can happen is if they're the same person. But your relationship with your lover is traditionally different. But what Chaucer is saying here is that it shouldn't be. So rather than Arviragus being a loser in this transaction, it's a win-win situation. He is her servant and her lord at the same time. So, you know, I mean, Chaucer didn't invent this. It sounds very much like a biblical, at least one interpretation of a biblical ideal of marriage. But I think in the Middle Ages, in practice, it was pretty rarely put this way. He goes with his wife home to his country, not far from Pedmark, where his dwelling was, where he lives in bliss and solace. Who could tell, unless he had been married, the joy, the ease, and the prosperity that is between a husband and his wife? And I point out that last passage just because so many people in Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales anyway, have said that and said it sarcastically. No, oh, nobody knows how wonderful it is to be married. Or in the case of the Merchant's Tale, January says that, but he says it before he gets married, and of course he's proved to be wrong. I think the Franklin, on the other hand, is completely unironic. I think he's completely sincere. Now, by the way, is the Franklin married? We have no idea. I mean, it sounds like he is or has been, because he said nobody except for the married can understand the bliss of that state. But we don't get much, unlike the wife of Bath, whose marriage history we know intimately, we don't really know anything about the Franklin. Okay, so um, Arviragus is a knight, and he does have to go and do knight things. And so he travels across the English Channel to, I think it says Armorica, but which means Britain, to make his fame and fortune in arms. And Dorigen becomes really morbidly obsessed. She becomes very, first of all, she's lonely. She misses her husband. And she becomes very sort of obsessed with the idea that when he comes back, his ship is going to crash on these rocks. And this is this nice Burne Jones picture here where he's illustrates how sort of cramped and constricted and claustrophobic she feels. But yeah, these black rocks along the coast of Brittany become emblematic for her of what might happen to her husband, that his ship could be dashed on these rocks. And I think the feeling that he could survive all of the fighting and all of the warring and come so close to home and be within sight and be dashed on the rocks has really upset her and made her sort of obsessive about it. And she's so upset and obsessed that her friends try to cheer her up, and they take her to a dance, take her to a party. And there she meets Aurelius. Now, Aurelius is a young, I can't remember if he's a squire. He's not yet a knight. And he is in love with Dorigen, and apparently has been. It's one of those things where he's seen her from afar. She barely even knows he exists, and they go to the party, and he flirts with her, and she's not interested in flirting. She's not interested in anybody but her husband. And he woos her, and he says, "What would it take for you to be mine?" And Aurelius in some ways is kind of the bad guy in the story, but I think one of the things we're supposed to imagine is in the world of the courtly love story, an adulterous relationship's not necessarily unheard of. And if he doesn't know her husband and doesn't realize how their love is a true love and not sort of a marriage of convenience, he's not utterly out of line. I mean, we would say he's utterly out of line, but I think maybe the audience is a little bit more sympathetic to him. But he certainly doesn't get it, and he certainly can't take a hint. And she says time and again, "No, I don't want to talk to you. I'm not interested in you. I have a husband. I'm very much in love." And so finally, to get rid of him, she says as a joke, "Okay, if you can make all of these black rocks along the coast disappear, I will be yours." And this is very much a fairy tale motif that we call the rash promise. The king who says, "Okay, I don't want anybody to marry my daughter, so the first knight that can climb up the side of the glass mountain can have my daughter." As soon as somebody makes a rash promise like that, you know that somehow, whether through magic or subterfuge or something, that they're going to have to be taken up on that promise. And so she says this sort of as a joke. Fine, if you can, because who can make tons and tons and tons and tons of rocks disappear? And so she says that to him, and that's for her. That's the end of it. I think she probably forgets this guy within a couple of days. She goes home. Her husband does return safe and sound, is not cast upon the rocks, and they live happily, and they would live happily ever after, except that um, meanwhile, Aurelius has fallen into an illness. He is so sick at heart and pining away for love. He falls into an illness, and he is on his deathbed, more or less. He's almost on his deathbed, and his brother goes to see him and says, "What's the matter?" And they get into this conversation, and the brother finds out what's going on. So the brother says, "Well, I know a man, an illusionist. He calls him a magician, but what he really is he's not really doing the magical things. He's making them appear. And this illusionist is accomplished and amazing. And so Aurelius pays him a huge amount of money, an obscene amount of money, which is surprising he even has, which is kind of a 50% down payment. And he says, I want you to make the rocks seem to disappear. Now, I personally have got a little bit of a beef with the way that Aurelius does this, because he does not, in fact, actually make the rocks go away. He just makes them seem to go away, which actually makes them much more dangerous. To me, there's an issue of whether he actually even fulfills his promise. If you look at the different passages in the tale where it's mentioned, I suppose it can be a little bit ambiguous. But anyway, nevertheless, so he pays the money. The guy makes the rocks disappear. And he encounters Dorigen on a day when her husband is out of town for a period of 3 days, and says, I'm not going to pressure you into anything, but I want you to look out your window and see what you see, or see what you don't see, and remember what you promised me. And I will be back in this park in a couple of days at noon, and we'll just see what happens. So it's very interesting. He doesn't try to constrain her, because he knows that her character is such that her promise means so much that he doesn't need to try to constrain her, that she's going to realize she gave her word, even if it was a joke. Even, and my gosh, I mean, these days, you would just laugh this poor schlub off. I mean, the guy's just an idiot. But I think this is sort of along the lines of Griselda, that her commitment to the truth, we've already seen the word troth used in here. Her commitment to keeping her word and her integrity is so intense that she actually sees this as a catch-22, because of course she's made a vow to her husband in their marriage vows that she'll be faithful only to him. But she said to this guy that if he made this thing happen, which he has apparently made happen, that she would be his, that she would sleep with him. So she doesn't know what to do, and she's weeping, and she's in a terrible state. She even contemplates suicide, and then she realizes that suicide is not allowed by the church, but that self-starvation is, that fasting to the point where she just dies is. So, and she doesn't want to die, but she either is going to break her word to Aurelius or break her word to Arviragus, and she can't accept the idea that she's going to have to break her word. So she's in a state, and she doesn't know what to do. So, but now we have this remarkable moment in the story. So, 3 days into this quandary, says Arviragus came home, this worthy knight, and asked her why was she weeping so sorely. And she began to weep even more. Alas, she said, that ever I was born, thus have I said, she said, and thus have I sworn. And she told him all as you have heard before. I don't have to repeat it to you anymore. This husband, with glad cheer, with a pleasant face, and a friendly wise, answered and said, as I will tell you, is there aught else, Dorigen, but this? So what he says to her essentially is that all? You're weeping because of this promise. Is that all? Nay, nay, she said, God help me to be so wise. This is too much. Is this all? Yes, it's all, and it's more than enough. Wife, he said, let sleeping dogs lie. Let the thing that's still sleep. It may be well, perhaps, today. This may turn out okay. And hold on to that, because that's a little thing that Franklin's slipping in there. You shall keep your troth by my faith. For God so wisely have mercy on me. I had very much rather be sticked, because of the true love that I have for you, unless you keep your truth and say that truth is the highest thing that a man may keep. So essentially what he says to her is, look, don't worry about it. I know how important truth is to you, and it is that important to me, so I can get you out of this problem. And to get her out of this problem, he's going to release her from her wedding vows. Right? This so we'll talk about the particular craziness of that in a second. But what he says to, this is what he says is I want you to, I know how important this is to you. I know you can't bear the thought of breaking your word. But if I release you from your vow, then you would not be breaking your word to me, and therefore you can keep your word to Aurelius. Now, of course, that's going to mean going and sleeping with Aurelius. And that is, to the very least, problematic. But um, the Franklin knows that you, the reader, are thinking just exactly this thing, that this is crazy. So he sticks this little passage in here. Here's a nice, who is that? It's not Burne-Jones. Who did the windows in Magdalen College? I can't remember. Anyway, that's a nice pre-Raphaelite picture. It's actually Tristan and Isolde, but we're going to pretend like it's Dorigen and Aurelius. So anyway, the Franklin turns to us, or turns to the pilgrim, and says, perhaps a heap of you, indeed, will think that he's a foolish man in this. Lewd meaning ignorant, not lewd. In this, that he would put his wife in jeopardy. And that's what we're thinking, right? Why would you, what kind of virtue is it that you're sending your wife to have to sleep with this guy that she doesn't want to, and is pretty creepy. But the Franklin says, listen to the tale before you cry out upon her. She may have better fortune than it seems to you she will. And then when you have heard the tale, judge. So, and this is an interesting little crux here, because the Franklin is saying, I know it seems foolish that he would let his wife do this, or that he would ask his wife to do this, but hold on, you don't know the rest of the story. And so we're kind of reassured, oh, it's going to turn out okay. But on the other hand, I mean, if this is supposed to have any relationship to real life and what a real life marriage might be or mean, how can we count on in real life having good luck, which is sort of what we're being told to wait on here. And there are a couple of answers to that we'll talk about. But the Franklin, the Franklin's smart. He knows. He says, "Now I know a lot of you think this sounds crazy, but listen to the rest of the story." Okay, so and then the rest of the story, of course, is she goes to meet Aurelius, and Aurelius is so moved by her husband's understanding and generosity, and also moved by her sad appearance. I mean, she just doesn't. It's not very attractive that she looks like the very last thing on earth she wants to do is to let you touch her. So he releases her, and he says, "I want you to tell your husband that a squire can be as generous as a knight, because he released you from your vow, but I'm releasing you from your vow so that you can keep your vow to him." And so Dorigen and Arviragus go off and live happily ever after. But then we've got this third matter, which is that the squire Aurelius owes another 500 pounds to the illusionist because he only paid for half of it, and he doesn't have this money. I mean, it's amazing that he had the first amount of money to begin with. So he goes to the fellow and he says, "Look, I can't pay you. You can throw me in prison, or you can, do whatever you like, but I don't have the money." And the illusionist says to him, "Well, were you not satisfied? Did I not make the rocks disappear?" And so Aurelius tells him the whole situation, and then the magician sort of turns around and says, "Ah, well, because the knight was so generous, and because you were so generous in turn, I will be generous, and I will release you your debt. And so I want you to know that a magician can be as generous as a knight and a squire." And so the thing that you're left with at the end of the story, and this is we talked about the demande d'amour before, where in telling a tale, there's some sort of question that's posed to the audience. So here the demande d'amour is, which was the most free, as thinketh thou, who was the most generous? And free, F-R-E, meaning F-R-E, like free with their spirit, generous of spirit, generous of whatever. In money, in the case of the magician, whatever. So who was the most generous? And I think we're supposed to include Arviragus Aurelius and the magician, and possibly Dorigen in this. Which of these four? And again, like all of these questions, I don't think there's necessarily meant to be one answer. I think rather we're supposed to it's supposed to excite conversation and things like that. So, and that's what I'm going to make your discussion question, as you probably guessed, because that'll be an interesting thing to hear you guys weigh in on. So that's one of the themes, is this who was the most generous. But I think the more important theme, and I think certainly to us as 21st century people, the more important theme is this model of marriage that he puts out, because this, we've seen The Wife of Bath, we've seen the Miller's Tale, we've seen the Clerk's Tale, we've seen all these different crazy ideas of marriage, none of which have been particularly satisfactory or happy or laudable. And then we end on this one, and I think that this one, whatever you think about the sort of giving your wife permission to go and be with this guy, I mean, that's obviously kind of nuts. But I think that the model of marriage where he says, I'm never going to try to make you do anything because I don't think that's right. And he says that of his own free will. And she says, well, because you're so generous in saying that, I'm never going to do anything that's going to make you feel like you ought to try to control me. And this idea that the Franklin uses the word friends. Friends must always obey each other because love will not be constrained by mastery. That's very much the model for companionate marriage that we like to think that we have. I mean, everybody doesn't live up to it, of course, but this is, we have this ideal now in the later days that I want to marry my best friend. Right? I want to marry someone that we have mutual respect and we like the same things and we have the same values and things like that. And I think that's very much what Chaucer, through the Franklin, is proposing. Is that this seems to be a model of marriage that's workable, but it's it's set in this fantasy fairy tale with magic and knights and ladies and rocks and ships and stuff. But I think there's a very real kernel of marriage philosophy in there that he is pretty interested in. All right, so that's the end of that one, and I'll post this. Obviously, you will not have seen this until I post it, so this announcement doesn't do you any good. But I also will post one or two discussion questions for it. I think you probably saw that last week's discussion, I just responded to it in writing rather than making a screencast. It seemed to be the appropriate thing for that one. But anyhow, I hope that you're all excited to read the Franklin's Tale if you haven't already, and I will be discussing it soon.